Total Warhammer is a perfect depiction of excess. You select a faction whose morality ranges from clinically disturbed to actively illegal, declare it morally perfect, and then remove anyone who disagrees. You can play as the Bretonians if you love toxic chivalry, where 99% of the population exists as biodegradable furniture for the 1% who can afford a horse. Or the High Elves, if the biggest battle you have is with your own sexuality. But if your goal is sexual deviancy, government protection, and well, whatever this is supposed to be, then your destiny is Slaanesh. Slaanesh is not about lands. That's for people with morals. We are after the ultimate experience, a high that will leave you hanging with excitement. Your progress isn't tracked on a map, but purely through the mental sanity of your assigned psychiatrist. The campaign begins in Lustria, ancient home of the dinosaurs, which now contains around 2 dinosaurs and around 750 unrelated species. Even Wulfric is here now, and nobody knows why. Naturally, I began as the Masque, a character who experiences identity as most people experience a Spotify playlist. The Masque does not have a personality, it rotates them, depending on what will feel the most intense in the next 30 seconds. Think High School Musical if every number was a cry for help. I selected a Pageant of Pain. Yeah, boy. And I immediately set out to explore my newly acquired violent tendencies on the Dark Elves. They were not defeated, but introduced to a higher standard of experience by a purple BDSM enthusiast on a chariot. After taking the Wellspring of Eternity, I reached my first crossroad. Now in the usual Warhammer fashion, I was surrounded by races who hate me for the color of my skin. To the north, Yuan Bo, a Chinese bureaucrat with growing skepticism towards my purple complexion. In front, Wolfheart, the Empire's most enthusiastic huntsman, here to remind everyone that colonialism is still a growing industry. And to the south we have Rakarth and Skulltaker. One is famous for loving animals to a dangerous degree, and the other one is a serial killer, which is to say I currently got more in common with them than with the humans. Luckily, Wolfheart, with the intelligence of a deer, decided to sprint directly in front of a speeding car. Unfortunately, Wolfheart is a very big animal and I am a very degenerate looking car. In moments like this, you can press the emergency button, which will, by most accounts, remove most if not all your strategic thinking. Using my newfound speed, I could ram Wolfheart directly into his colonoscopy exam. Now this extra army is not permanent, it slowly deteriorates, as most things touched by chlamydia, at a rate determined by how purple your ground is. Approaching Wolfheart's final settlement, Otter decided to run away, as to not witness the approaching tragedy. This was not wise, only to come back the very next turn. This was even less wise. Seeing that the French were struggling with natural selection that came in the form of a red demon from hell, placed my army in a way that signifies great trust. I formed a pact with Skulltaker and later vassalized him, giving him the French land he has been fighting for since the game began. But thankfully, thanks to Skulltaker's innovative ways of collecting ornaments, the French, just like in history, did not last long. After freeing Lustria from European colonialism, I decided to free it from Yuan Bo, but not before vassalizing Middenland. As you will come to find out, as most things in my campaigns, this serves no actual purpose. My return to Lustria was met with a preemptive violence against Yuan Bo because of the newly environmental goals set by our Chaos Overlords. Taking his settlement is technically carbon neutral. This goodwill was reciprocated by a cafe and levy. Their composition was interesting to say the least. 1 lord for soldiers of questionable professionalisms and 12 peasants armed with pointed sticks. The peasants attempted to penetrate my demoness. This was answered, of course, with a giant whip followed by razor-bladed chariots. This was not a good day for the peasantry. Following his people, Yuan Bo attacked my city. Now you will see the auto-resolve is trying to gaslight you. But at this point, you have a second hidden technique. Capitalism. Using money, I convinced 2 of his units that their loyalties were in fact negotiable, in which I managed to get their souls for the combined price of a 59 Ti. Their dedication was immediately rewarded by being placed on the front lines. Unfortunately, because of advanced topography, the AI found it hard to advance, but I had a clear solution: casting Bad Vibe. This worked splendidly, and my newly acquired units could start shooting their former friends. After this decisive battle, taking over Fox, I noticed that the Masque unlocked the Flow of Desire, which is the final ability of his newly found personality, which is the final ability of her newly found personality. This grants me a very cool ability. I will be completely honest, I never use these abilities, because they are located in a part of the UI I have never once acknowledged. But finishing this gives us a cool permanent buff, which like all healthy systems rewards escalating addiction with increased efficiency. The ultimate reward is the final dance. Extremely powerful, extremely violent, and extremely gay. Before trampling over the lives of the poor and pedagogically challenged, I decided to utilize one of my unholy manifestations. This mechanic operates on the principle of magical thinking. If you believe in something hard enough and with sufficient spite, it becomes reality. I believed very hard in emigrating to the West, and as if by magic, a cult spontaneously manifested in Altdorf. To be completely honest, these cults are all recent magical immigrants with questionable paperwork and a burning desire to facilitate a sudden violent change of management. They all have a singular beautiful purpose of being an emergency Uber driver for your legendary lord. In the end turn, I received a delightful surprise. Festus, in a feat of charitable confusion, decided to donate money for a war I have no memory of participating in, and Rakarth, perhaps misreading my relentless ambitions as camaraderie, decided to be my friend. Things were looking great. I even had my first McDonald's franchise in the floating pyramids. This state of borderline competence was of course unsustainable, said one of my 4 primary personalities, and as a responsible architect of my own demise, I heeded this internal audit, which 9 out of 10 psychiatrists would not recommend. I declared war on Mazdamundi. Upon seeing 2 full Lizardmen armies materialize, I realized that the committee in my head had for once reached a quorum. Facing them with anything resembling fair combat would not be wise, so I didn't do it. I adopted a posture of strategic ambiguity near my own border, and then managed to isolate this lizardman, whose name I will not be pronouncing, who was chaperoning 18 lizardmen and 1 ogre who seemed deeply unsure of his life choices. A single second later, I got attacked by Mazdamundi and his surprisingly worse army. Fortunately, I managed to find funds to acquire 2 skink units whose moral barometers had been calibrated by a lifetime of profound disappointment. I honestly don't know how I won, but something tells me that ramming them repeatedly probably helped. After taking over Hexarel, I finally came near one of my few friends, Morafi from the Cult of Pleasure. This tender moment of friendship obviously had to be ruined by the local heroin addict, appearing on the coast of Mazdamundi, where he, in a typical heroin-induced fashion, began violating personal space. I also got enough devotees from questionable sources to initiate my special operation, Somali Daycare, proliferating cults across either human or subhuman settlements. Of course, 2 of the cults established themselves as neighbors. After relieving the land of all 900 kg of body positivity, Skulltaker in all his glory took over a single settlement, which just so happens to be the worst settlement, the only one I want, and that's the furthest away from his home, proving once again you can't predict the AI, because it's really fucking stupid. Having taken over the north, I could finally focus on my southern territory. So what is the plan, Donnie?
I'm gonna bomb the shit out of them. It's true.
That's right, which is to say, we got attacked unprovoked by a lizard with ambitions. This was quickly rectified by how all world powers do it. I started a cult in Gorek's home, and then proceeded to use my emergency Uber driver. Before I start committing egregious war crimes, I got an offer of friendship from Rakarth. Obviously, I declined and proceeded to steal his property. Now it was finally time for my inevitable yet predictable betrayal. After stealing economic benefits, it was finally time to steal their land as well. Now, because of my enormous inflated ego, I decided to do the unwise thing of fighting Gorak simultaneously. Now, this was a great plan. It started out very good, with me taking all of their oil, until I inevitably realized that I had to fight an actual siege battle. This brought me not only a lot of joy, by which I mean I had to watch my demonettes get repeatedly rammed by dinosaurs 20 times their size. Oh, and don't feel bad for them, they enjoyed it, and so did I. The war with Gorak wasn't a war, it was exposure therapy for a phobia I didn't know I had. Each time a new dinosaur appeared, I had to expose myself to 15 minutes of watching a self-help video. And there were a lot of dinosaurs. But finally, through the simple fact that my legendary lord makes the below average demonette a borderline megalomaniac, I could finally reach Gorak's home. And for all natives, this is the worst thing that could happen to you. After a quick mathematical calculation, we had about all of this to take over, which is owned by some reason by the elves, Skaven, and the second dinosaur on this island. I quickly began my liberation movement of the island by building a cult and teleporting masque to... The dinosaurs deserve this for these names. Now some would say that my actions are all but justified, and I would disagree. I mean, look at it. This paper that I clearly wrote on just a second ago clearly says Lustria belongs to Slaanesh. Now, as a fair assessment, I mean, look at it this way. Anyone that commands such units, could they ever be a bad person? Checkmate, atheist. Now, all in all, my campaign of elf and lizard removal was interrupted by a local crackhead, Oxyarl the Gecko, decided to illegally immigrate to Lustria. What do my general think about this?
Springfield, they're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
Thank you, Donald. So sending my most adequate general, Masque, to the south, I tried to establish peace and prosperity through indiscriminate violence. This turned out great. I beat up a settlement and established a local militia of the most sane individuals. Well, back in Lustria, with a grand of 2 factions left, I firstly let Scarbrand go after years of good service. We all know where this is going. I started a pest extermination on the Skaven, by which I mean I had several sexual deviants covered in too much baby oil go around and introduce the Skaven to all 29 out of 30 STDs on the market. This worked wonders, and I could finally remove the biggest hindrance since turn 1. Well, now with that out of the way, with Lustria united under all 4 of my personalities in a singular body of a mentally sane deviant, this is all for this one. Well, if you have enjoyed this conquest of Lustria, great. If you want to see more, watch the news, because what the fuck is going on nowadays? Well, anyways, see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.